Welcome to Fowl Play, the sequel to the Nut Heist. In the Nut Heist, the adventure focused on the forces of the Kingdom of Acorna. In this installment, the adventure revolves around the Black Eastern Chipmunk Squad, known as the Becks, the Delta Force of the Chipmunk Kingdom of Doosan, and their newest member, Elgar. Sit back and enjoy the adventure, for who knows what will happen in the woods when foul play is involved. Fowl Play by Trisha M. Wilson, Episode 5, Chapter 5, Fun with Maps. From her post at the door of the conference room, Roswitha glanced around at all who were present. Queen Lucina and King Ulrich were seated on one side of the table, while Arwell and Elined were on the other side. The four children were seated on the shorter sides of the rectangular table. This enabled them to stay out of the way, but also see and hear what was going on. Once everyone was settled into their seats, Ulrich said, "Why don't we start with each side telling the other side what they want to get out of this conference?" At nods of agreement from both Arwell and Elined, he continued speaking. "I'll start first. Lucina and I would like to come to some agreement with you on how to split the land in between our two kingdoms, and come to a mutually beneficial agreement for our two peoples to inhabit the same trees at the same time in harmony." Arwell nodded his head in agreement to what Ulrich said. "We too would like those things, but in addition, we want to make sure there are areas in the kingdoms I represent which will not house your people. You see, some of the birds in the Blevins United Confederation are very uncomfortable being around non-birds, and this area is where some of your people have moved into our trees. We would like to come to an arrangement that would relocate these families and bar any other unauthorized settlers from invading these birds' homes." Lucina glanced at Ulrich and said, "We can understand that, but before we start with the details, Tancred has made up a map of our two lands and the current boundaries." Tancred, ever present and ready to assist, came forward and unraveled the map that he had drawn. As Arwell started to look at the map, Elined said, "We too brought a map of our mutual borders, drawn by one of our own people, of course." Close by, her daughter, Afinen, unrolled the map she'd been carrying and put it on the table. For a few minutes everyone was quiet while they examined the maps and compared them to each other. "This is wrong," Elined said, breaking up the silence. She pointed to an area of the map Tancred had created. "This is not our southern border. One of our populations recently expanded to this point nearest to the water. If you look at our map, you will see what I mean." She leaned over and pointed to the area she was talking about. "Your map needs to be changed to correct this boundary expansion." "When was the boundary expanded?" Tancred asked. "It had to have been last summer," Arwell said, looking to Elined for confirmation. At her nodding head, he said, "That group was becoming overcrowded in their current location and received permission from the Confederation to inhabit an unoccupied area of the forest." "Tancred, when was our map made up?" Ulrich asked, still looking at the boundaries. "I had my men out there during the winter. The minute I heard that we would be speaking with the Blevins, I had them out there so we could create an accurate map of what the boundaries are now." "When exactly did your men go out there?" Arwell asked. "A week after we had a huge snowstorm. That was a few days after the winter solstice." "That explains the confusion," Arwell said with a laugh. "During that time, those birds don't leave their nests. They stay inside for about a month. They don't leave for anything." "Really? Some of your people don't leave their nests for weeks at a time?" Ulrich asked in a surprised voice. "You would be surprised about what we do and don't do. But back to these maps. Other than that mistake, it appears as if everything else is correct on our side of things. Right, Elined?" "Yes, I don't see any other discrepancies," Elined said. Lucina had been looking at the maps for a few minutes in silence while the others had been talking. Now she looked up and said, "There is another mistake. Our people do not live in this area. We have never lived here. I believe this land belongs to another kingdom, but we don't have any contact with them." "Really?" "We have had sightings of at least one squirrel in this area," Ellinet said. "A squirrel? There?" Roswitha asked from her post by the door. "Yes, I believe they said it was a most unusual squirrel, all white in color, such as Queen Lucina," Arwell said. "A white squirrel?" Ulrich asked, as if he hadn't heard correctly. "Yes, it was only a glance, but our scouts were most insistent that it was a squirrel. That is why we included this area as your territory," Arwell said. "Perhaps in the future we should try to talk to them. If squirrels are living there, then we might be related to them somehow," Lucina said, intrigued. "As interesting as this all is, let us get back to the map. Is everything else correct?" Elliot asked impatiently. "Yes," Ulrich said after a glance at his wife. "Now I believe—" "Dad, I'm bored," Nesta said from where she'd been sitting. "Can we go play?" "Yeah, Dad, can we?" Rise said. Arwell looked surprised at his children's words. "But don't you want to keep watching? We've only just started." "But you're not doing anything cool. I thought there'd be fighting and yelling and all the cool stuff you always hear about happening at conferences. But you aren't doing anything," Rise said, sounding disappointed at the lack of action. "I suppose you too would like to leave, Adern?" Arwell asked in a resigned voice. His only response was a tired nod. "Do you want to stay, Afanan?" Eluned asked her daughter. "Yes, it is becoming quite interesting." "Tancred, would you please bring the children to their mother?" Ulrich asked. "Certainly. Is she in the palace, or did she go down to the festival?" Tancred asked Arwell. "I'm not sure. She did mention something about going to the festival, but she was also very tired after our journey here. She could be anywhere, actually," he responded thoughtfully. "Can we go to the festival?" Nesta asked, as she ran over to Tancred. Tancred glanced at her father, who nodded his head before saying, "Of course you can. But first, why don't we try to find your mother?" Leading the group out of the room, the adults left in the conference room could hear him still talking with the children about what was happening at the festival. "Now back to the map. If I remember correctly, this area is what we could call the disputed zone, correct?" Eluned said, pointing to a region on the map. "Yes," Lucina said. "How many people have you moved into this area?" Eluned asked. "We didn't move anyone into the area," Ulrich said, sitting back in his chair. "But to answer your question, about 30 squirrels have moved in, as far as we know." "We have witnessed about that amount of squirrels," Eluned said. "How long have your people occupied the area?" Lucina asked. Arwell sighed. "We have been there for a very long time." "When are we going to the festival?" Rise asked for what had to be the 10th time since they left the conference room. "Now," Tancred said, "right now. We would have gone sooner, but we had to try to find your mother." Leading the group toward the front door of the palace, he said, "What are the rules while we are at the festival?" "Rules? We're going to have fun! Rules are for school!" Nesta said, pulling her sister along behind her. "Wrong," Tancred said, stopping right next to the door. "There are rules for everything and every situation. This situation is no different. When we walk out this door and to the festival, you will listen to me. You will not run away from me no matter what you see or hear. I don't care if it's the most interesting thing on earth. You will stay with the group. Do you understand?" "Yes," they all mumbled, looking gloomy. "Cheer up," Tancred said as he opened the door for them. We will have lots of fun." The second the door opened, the children charged through, already forgetting the rules that Tancred had laid out seconds before. With unexpected speed, Tancred jumped in front of the children, stopping them in their tracks. "Where do you think you're going?" Tancred asked in a level voice. "The festival! We can see it! It's right there!" Rise said, pointing toward the festival grounds. "Not without me, you're not," Tancred said. "If you can't wait for me, you will not be able to go to the festival." Nesta and Rise started to whine, but Tancred said, "Would your parents let you go to the festival alone, without them right next to you?" They all thought for a second before they shook their heads. "That is what I thought. Today I am your parent, and you will not leave my side, or you can turn around this second and go to your rooms." Nesta glanced at Rise and said, "Fine." As a group, they walked toward the festival grounds, with the children trying to hurry up Tancred, whom they were convinced was walking slower than he needed to. An hour later, Rise, Nesta, and Adern had just finished riding the Ferris wheel for the 5th time. Walking up to Tancred, Adern said, "I'm hungry." "But you ate an hour and a half ago," Tancred said, trying to placate the child. A determined look entered her face. "I'm hungry," she said again, this time with more emphasis on each of the 2 words. "You better feed her," Rise warned, "or else you'll regret it." "We will eat in a little while, but not now," Tancred said, ignoring Rise's advice. "Don't say I didn't warn you," Rise said, stepping back from his sister as she took a deep breath of air. "I'm hungry! I'm hungry! I'm hungry!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. Everyone around the group turned and stared at the little girl who kept repeating those 2 words. Tancred tried to come up with a plan to stop the screaming, but all that came out of his mouth was, "All right, I'll feed all of you, if you stop that screaming right now." In an instant, she was quiet and had a satisfied look on her face. Tancred blew out a breath and led the group to a vendor that was selling food. "What do you want?" he asked, looking at the menu. "I want deep-fried worms," Adern said. "I want seed cake," Rise said. "I want a seed cake too," Nesta said. To the person waiting in the booth, Tancred said, "Can I have 3 seed cakes and 1 deep-fried worm?" "Certainly," the woman said as she turned to get the food. "Why don't you find a seat and I'll bring the food when it's ready," Tancred said. "But stay together and don't leave the immediate area. Understand?" He yelled to their retreating backs. His only response was a hastily yelled, "Okay," from one of them. Turning back to wait for the food, Tancred blew out a deep breath and wondered what His Majesty had gotten him into. Foul Play was written by Trisha M. Wilson and read by R.L. Ferguson. For comments or compliments, just head over to Colbyjack.net and look for our contact page. Foul Play is released under Creative Commons non-commercial no derivatives license. Share it with whoever you want, just don't sell it or change it. Have a nice day. Foul Play is now available in ebook format from Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and Smashwords. While you're there, check out our other titles such as The Nut Heist, the prequel to Foul Play, or Nightmare, A Tale of Obsession and Murder. Links to all her wonderful titles are available at our homepage at Colbyjack.net.